Good morning, everybody. If this is your first time visiting with us today, you are in for a treat. This morning, you are going to hear from my good friend, Stuart Hall. Now, we are in week 5 of the series, This Is Us, where we've been looking at what the Bible says about relationships and things like that. Well, today, Stuart will be talking about parenting. So please give a huge North Metro Church welcome to Stuart Hall.
So 10 plus months ago, our country's attention was riveted to the Caribbean, not because a ton of people wanted to go on vacation, but because there was a hurricane forming that was become Hurricane Irma that was forming in the Caribbean just a few weeks removed, if you remember correctly, from a hurricane that hit the Houston, Texas area. If you know anybody from Houston, you know that they are still trying to dig out from that experience because it was a devastating, Hurricane Harvey was incredibly devastating to the people of Houston and the surrounding areas. But this hurricane started forming in the Caribbean that they named Irma. And what the experts began to say is that Hurricane Irma would be the largest, most powerful, most destructive hurricane of its time and in record of them being able to track a hurricane. And teenagers, children, if you're sitting with your parents, let me tell you what adults do when there's bad weather. We turn to the Weather Channel because what would we do without Jim Cantori, right? We need to know what the ballhead wonder has to say, and we might just see a cow fly by. It's a cool experience. So we all turned to Jim Cantori, and my family, especially, our family, had an expressed interest in what was happening with Hurricane Irma because my wife Kelly and I have 3 children. We have a son who is 23, a daughter who's about to be 21, and a daughter who just turned 18. Well, our daughter who is about to be 21 happens to attend college in the Orlando area right here where this number 2 is. And they're projecting that this hurricane is literally going to split the state of Florida in half. And if you're a parent in this room, you can understand our angst. Just 2 weeks before, we had taken her to school, and now they're saying we've got to evacuate her. And so we're going, okay, how are we going to get there? And the awful part about living in Florida is that there's only one way to evacuate, and that's north. And so that's going to cause an issue. So we're frustrated, and there's a lot of tense moments, and we're trying to see what the hurricane's going to do. And so I stay home from work a couple of days before landfall, and I put the Weather Channel on, CNN and the Weather Channel on the television all day long. And what was interesting, me working from home, because we were concerned about the hurricane, at least 5 times 2 days before landfall, at least 5 times, the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, came on the Weather Channel and CNN and made a public plea to the people of Florida to evacuate. Because people in Florida were deciding, we're going to try to ride it out. We're going to choose to stay here and ride this out. And one of the things that was interesting to me in what he continually said those 5 times that I listened to him, he said, we can rebuild your home, we can't rebuild your life. We can rebuild your home, but we can't rebuild your life. The unspoken implication was that men and women were deciding that we would rather die with all our stuff than leave all of our stuff and live. And my dad used to say there's 2 kinds of dumb, and that's 4 of them. To decide that my stuff is so important that I will risk dying as long as I can be near my home or in my home or near this cool car or near this cool boat versus I'm going to get out of here and live and perhaps live my stuff. All of us in this room, in fact, you're listening to me talking about this and you're going, that's a no-brainer. If I'm going to risk my life, I am going to leave. So what's interesting, that was 2 days before landfall, the day that Hurricane Irma made landfall. A radio station here in Atlanta interviewed a grandmother who was in Key West. For those of you that are geographically challenged, Key West is at the tip of Florida. So they interviewed this grandmother in Key West who was refusing to leave on the air, on live radio, and they asked her, are you going to evacuate? And she said, and I quote, this ain't my first rodeo, I ain't going nowhere. And then they asked her, what have you done to prepare? And she said, I brought my garbage cans in. And I'm riding down the road listening to this giggling because I think we can all agree, bringing your garbage cans in 280 mile an hour winds is not preparation. It's not. And all of us in this room, I tell you that because we're all giggling going, that's so silly and it's so futile that people have gotten their priorities all mixed up. Well, here's what I would submit to all of us in this room. It's really easy for all of us to get distracted about what matters most. There's not one single person in this room that doesn't get distracted about what matters most. And so as we're in part 5 of This Is Us, talking about parenting today, first of all, where are the parents? You are a parent in the room. Raise it high. We're tired. We know why we're tired. If you're sitting with your children, kids, teenagers, the reason why your parents were so slow raising their hands is because parenting, I speak on behalf of every parent in the world that's ever existed when I say that parenting is by far the most difficult job we've ever had. Am I right, parents? It's incredible. She's cheering about it. All right. It's unbelievably hard, kids and teenagers. And let me tell you why parenting is hard. You're the reason why it's hard. You're the reason why it's hard. Maybe, how many of you are the child of a parent? Raise your hand. Trick question, like, am I? Yes, you are. Now, I think parenting is like trying to fold a fitted sheet. You start really, focused, and then at some point you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, right? But we as moms and dads in this room, I'm just going to make this assumption, and I think it's a safe assumption. You're here, and there's something in you that has you here, as in this place physically. And I'm assuming that the reason why you as a parent are sitting in this room is that you think that the claims of Jesus and the things of God are important. And I would also make the assumption that in you thinking that, your children in your mind need to think that same way. And the difficulty for all of us in this room is that our time is fleeting with our children. There are some of you that raised your hand, your child is graduating from high school next year and you don't know where the time went. It flew by. Some of you are sitting beside your graduated senior and they're leaving in a month or two to go out to college. And you're like, what happened? How quickly this went by. And there are those of you that are the parents of preschoolers or elementary age, and you're thinking, I don't think that, it's going very slow. But all of us have to ask ourselves this question as men and women, as moms and dads. And yes, those of you even in this room, you're not a parent. We have to ask, what's most important? What matters most as it relates to this idea of parenting our children in a day and age that's incredibly insane? I think it will do us well. I hate bad news, but sometimes the smartest thing that we can do to maybe kickstart some things in our life spiritually, emotionally, is to understand the fragility and the intenseness of the moment we're in. So for those of you that care, if your son or daughter was born between 1995 and 2012, you are raising Generation Z. Experts call them Generation Z. And let me tell you about Generation Z. Generation Z has been marked by the recession. Generation Z is the first generation since the generation that lived through the Great Depression to live through a recession and an economic crash. And here's what that means for every parent in this room, adult in this room. It means that their moms and dads and their moms and dads' moms and dads, they watch them lose their life savings. They are watching the American dream no longer be an American dream. It's an American nightmare. That's the reason why, for those of you that care, that the statistics and data, the numbers for sexual activity and drug and alcohol abuse with Generation Z is trending down. Depression and suicide is trending out the roof. They are considered by most experts the loneliest generation that's ever been on the planet. They can have 15,000 followers on social media and feel like they're by themselves. That's who you and I parent. They are also Wi-Fi enabled. In other words, they have a digital heartbeat. And that digital heartbeat takes them to this platform called social media, where they are constantly comparing themselves and there is constant anxiety. If you don't believe they're Wi-Fi enabled, sit in a Starbucks and watch teenagers come in. And watch how quickly they get on their phones. If you've ever sat among a pod of teenagers, that's what we call them, you will notice that you will not see the white of their eyes. You will see the crown of their head because they're doing this. They're Wi-Fi enabled. They are the most multiracial generation that's ever existed. Here's what's amazing and beautiful about Generation Z. They see color and celebrate it. They see color and they applaud it. The issue with multiracial isn't necessarily the guys and girls we're raising. The issue with multiracial is their parents. It's their grandparents. Because here's a heads up, moms and dads. You may be faced with this ugly part of you and how you were raised when one day your son or daughter comes home and has someone that they've fallen in love with that isn't the same color. You're going to have to deal with that. So the issue isn't them, it's us. They are the most sexually fluid generation that's ever existed. They are a post-Christian generation. Post-Christian, notice that I did not say anti-Christian. They are post-Christian. Basically, the best way I can summarize that, it means this, that you and I, most of us in this room grew up in a day and age where someone would say, well, the Bible says, and you and I would at least go, well, there's some authority to that, I need to listen. You say the Bible says to this generation, and they go, so? Because the Bible has lost authority with them. Now, I'm of the personal opinion, it's a gift to you and I as parents because it allows us to build the faith of our children on the foundation it should have been built on in the first place, and that's the person of Jesus and his resurrection. But they're post-Christian. They are self-directed. The reason why they're self-directed is they have underprotective parents. I am parenting Generation Z, and the parents in my generation reacted to their parents, and their parents were helicopter parents. And so what my generation has done is decided we're not going to be like our parents. You're going to have to self-direct yourself. We will underprotect you. My generation of parents that are parenting Generation Z, this is interesting. We are the first generation that does not look forward or has not looked forward to getting old. My mom and dad that could not wait to get old, sit in a rocking chair and have grandkids. My generation is doing everything we can to not get old. Thus this outfit. All right, so. I know there's a man back there, boy. Anyway, so. But what that means is that there's a disappearance of childhood. It does not mean that they are changing or evolving or growing from a developmental standpoint. If you're parenting a middle school student in this room, a middle school student cannot think abstract thought until after puberty. But they're constantly faced with abstract thought, which means their childhood is disappearing in front of them. They are growing older, younger, and then you throw in pornography. And here you sit as a parent. Here you sit as a grandparent. Here you sit as a church. And we have to make a decision. What's going to be most important? What is the thing that we are going to submit to our children, parents, as the preeminent thing as it relates to this person, Jesus, and this thing we call following him? And I find it interesting that we're faced with that, because here's a heads up. We have to parent and raise the children we have, not the children and people we were. We have to raise the children we have, not the children that we were. I wish in so many ways we could go back. But we can't. And for those of you that are parents of preschoolers sitting in here, I am not trying to be doom and gloom, but I'm not real sure that this is going to get better. So what do? Do you and I, as moms and dads, throw our hands up and go, I don't know, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm convinced that a lot of us in this room as parents, we're not necessarily apathetic, we're overwhelmed because we don't know what to do. And the reason why we don't know what to do, teenagers and kids, is we weren't born parents. You're just a guinea pig in our lab, We don't know what we're doing. But maybe we could take a clue if the issue is priorities from something that Jesus said constantly. Because for those of you that remember, the gospel accounts that we have of Jesus, he was constantly confronted with religious leaders who are always asking him one question. What's the most important commandment? What should be our priority? What's the most important thing for us to do? And if you listen or pay attention closely to how Jesus responded to that question, he would always respond to what's the one thing with two things. Because you can do that when you're the Lord. They would say, what's the first and greatest, what's the most important thing? And he would say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So here's what I'd like for us to do this morning. I would like for us to look at an interaction that Jesus had with a Pharisee, a religious lawyer. He had a PhD in religious law. He's confronted. Luke chapter 10, if you've got your Bibles and want to turn there. If not, we'll throw it up on the screens. And I want us to see how Jesus interacts with this person who seems to be asking, I want to get this right. Can you help me prioritize my life? Here's the interaction. We know that this guy had listened to Jesus before talk about this very subject because of something that he says in the interaction, and you'll see it in just a second. Here's what happens. One day, in Luke chapter 10, one day an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question, Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? Now, if you study this closely, you realize that there were a group of Pharisees that were constantly troubled with what Jesus was saying. They wanted to make sure he got labeled and branded a heretic, so they were constantly coming to him. They would always, and guys, you know about this, when you were in school, you had a group of friends that would always push you out front and say, you go talk to her, you go pick the fight. That's what's happening with this guy. This guy gets picked by the group to go and ask Jesus a question to test him. And the question is, what do I need to do, or what should I do to inherit eternal life? And for those of you that don't know, this is a Jewish crowd. This is a Jewish person talking to Jesus, a Jew, surrounded by Jews listening. We have a tendency in America to think that the Bible was written by Americans for Americans. These were Jews interacting with each other. So this religious lawyer asked Jesus, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And one of the bazillion things I love about Jesus is that Jesus constantly answered questions by asking a question. And so this guy goes, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus goes, what does the law say? What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it? In other words, you have a PhD in Pharisee. You tell me. How do you interpret the law? You know this. Because Jesus understood you're trying to paint me in a corner. And here's the heads up. You don't paint baby in a corner, and you don't paint Jesus in a corner. So Jesus is going, you know this. How do you interpret it? Now watch how the man responds. And here's how we know he had heard Jesus talk about this before. Because the man answered, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind. And this is interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Pharisees never included this last sentence. They had heard Jesus include it. And so we know he had heard Jesus talk about this before because he includes it. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. To which Jesus responds, yes! Right! In my translation, he's like, dude, you do that, it's all good in the hood, you're good, you're set. You do that and you will live. And you almost get this sense, we know from reading the Gospels, Jesus was constantly surrounded by crowds. You almost get this sense that Jesus is like, okay, my time with you is done. You answer correctly, you're good. And he turns to have a conversation with someone else. And what he doesn't realize is that this religious lawyer is still standing there with his arms crossed. Because he's thinking, I've got him. And Jesus turns and has this conversation with someone else, and the religious lawyer pipes up and says, and who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? I love the fact that Luke records that he asked this question to justify his actions. Let me give you some context. What they wanted Jesus to do was to add to the Torah, the Jewish Bible. If he added to it, they could declare him a heretic and have him crucified. And when Jesus says, and love your neighbor as yourself, he says, and who is my neighbor? This was a loaded question. And here's the reason why. If you don't know anything about first century Judaism, you should know this, that it has incredibly strict dietary restrictions, and they had incredibly strict relationship restrictions. And one of those relationship restrictions, you can find it in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge, look at this, against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. Psst. Jews were only required to love other Jews. So when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, this is what this guy is thinking. Who's my neighbor? If you say it's somebody other than a Jew, I've got you, you're a heretic. And how did Jesus respond? We're not going to throw this up on the screen because everybody in this room, regardless of your spiritual heritage, regardless of your church experience, you know the answer. You know how Jesus responded. Because it's not just a story that has echoed through the annals of time in Christianity, but also in other religions. Politicians use it. Our school systems use it. Jesus turns to him and says, let me tell you a story. It's the story that you and I know, and we commonly call the parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus' response to this question was the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the story, for those of you that care, goes like this. One day there was a man on his way to Jericho. Jericho's this treacherous, uphill, very narrow path, rocky. And on his way there, teenagers, he gets jumped. A couple of guys jump out, beat him up, rob him, and they beat him within an inch of his life, and they leave him to die. And as this man is bleeding, bruised, dying in the middle of the road, Jesus says, a rabbi comes by. A rabbi walks up on this guy, and the rabbi does what any God-fearing rabbi would do. He gets as far away on the other side of the road as he can, and he books chili. I'm out. And then Jesus said, a priest comes upon this man laying in the middle of the road, and he does what a priest should do. He gets as far away to the other side of the road as he can, and he walks as fast as he can, and he leaves. Then Jesus said, now remember, Americans, Jews were listening. And as soon as Jesus said this next bit, everybody in the crowd gasped. Because Jesus said, and then a Samaritan came by. Oh, ew. Jews and Samaritans hated each other. And Jesus said a Samaritan came by, and he rushed to the man's side, and he knelt down beside him, and he began to bandage his wounds and give him water, and he put him on his mode of transportation, and he took him to the Motel 6 because the light was on. And when he got there, he gave the man some money, and he said, whatever this man needs, you give it to him, and I'll pay you back when I get back from my business. Jesus tells that story, and he looks at the religious lawyer and goes, now you tell me, who is the better neighbor? The rabbi? The priest? Or the Samaritan? And you know that this guy's going, crap. He goes, and this is how much Jews hated Samaritans. He couldn't even say the word Samaritan. He said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus leans in and goes, go be like that guy. Be like him. Now, if you're listening to Jesus teach this lesson, everybody in the crowd immediately thought one huge thought. They thought, how in the world, who taught the Good Samaritan to be good, because Samaritan and good to Jews was an oxymoron. It was like diet chocolate. It was like fat-free gravy. It did not exist. There was no such thing as a good Samaritan. And part of the reason why is that 10 of the tribes of Israel had been taken captive, gone to Babylon, and Assyrians rushed in, took over that part of Judea, Samaria, and they began to intermarry with Jews. Relation restrictions are already messed up. Now there's interracial marriage. They bring their pagan religions into the picture. True story. The only reason why that broke up a little bit, study your history, is that there was an outbreak of lion attacks in Samaria, and it scared the Assyrian king. Lions as in Mufasa, that lion, okay? That guy. Lion attacks. They no longer believed Mount Sinai was the holy mountain where Moses got the 10 Commandments. They didn't think Jerusalem was the holy city. All these outlaws and outcasts moved to Samaria. So Jews thinking a Samaritan is good, there's no way. But I think there's a bigger question that all of us in this room have to wrestle with. And it's this: how and why did the rabbi and priest grow up and miss it the way they did? How did two men who knew the Torah backwards and forwards, knew the Levitical law, 613 plus, how did they know all this? And they were how could someone be so theologically correct and so relationally insensitive? How did that happen? And I think all of us as parents in this room have to wrestle with this question. Because Jesus' model for the right kind of neighbor was a theologically incorrect, morally inferior, racially despised, half-breed Babylonian who the average Pharisee would have never invited to dinner. And Jesus said, you go and be like that guy. And so here's what I would like to do this morning, parents, to submit a question. What would happen in your family if you decided to be a family who simply does what Jesus said matters most? Instead of you going, well, they've got to know all the right things and have the T's crossed and the I's dotted, what if you as a family decided we are going to be a family who prioritizes what Jesus said matters most? And what he says matters most is love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. What would your family look like if that was your MO? And I've got to be really, really honest with you. When my wife Kelly and I started having kids, here's a picture of our 3 kids. They've grown up. Cameron, our youngest, Grant, our son, our oldest daughter, Chandler. And I know, yes, I married way over my head. It's not funny that you're giggling at how pretty they are and how ugly I am. I don't appreciate it. But when we started having children, and some of you in this room, I think, feel this way. Maybe you had a mom and dad, maybe how you were parented, you immediately said, we're not going to be that way. If you're sitting beside your parents, not y'all, but the others of us in this room who had parents that were like, I don't think we want to follow that model. My wife and I didn't have models that we wanted to follow. And so we started having children, and we thought, one of the first thoughts we had is we believed what A.W. Tozer said when he said, what you think about God is the most important thing about you. And so we started going, who are those men and women in our life that are parents who theology is incredibly important to them, the scriptures are really, really important to them, that's a really, really big deal, and they're raising kids that way. And we found those people in our life and we said, let's follow their example. Here was the problem with that. And maybe it was respective to the people we chose. But all of those people who held theology at this utmost level, they were the most rude, arrogant, judgmental, uncaring, relationally insensitive, and were raising children the same exact way. And so we went, what if we just decide to raise kids who love Jesus and love their neighbor? Now, you need to hear me saying, I am not holding our children up as a standard. I'm only having this picture on the screen because these are my kids. And some of you, I know, you're immediately going, you want to talk about oxymoron, kids and teenagers who love Jesus and love their neighbor? That's an oxymoron. And can I tell you why we think that? We think that because of this gentleman. Some of you are like, Grandpa? No, this is G. Stanley Hall, no relation to me. G. Stanley Hall, America's first child psychologist, who, as a side hustle, was an evolution theorist. And as a part of his evolutionary theory or theorist side hustle, he invented an idea or a concept called recapitulation that basically means this, that any species during the lifespan of that particular species exhibits the same sort of patterns as it grows. So, for example, puppy is born, big feet, too big for its body. It grows into its body. It has a ton of fun. It brings so much joy to our families. Eventually, it begins its decline, and it either dies of old age or an accident, or you have the horrible, task of taking that dog and having it put down. With dogs, it's the same thing. He said the same thing is true of humans. That there is the same sort of life cycle and the same sort of patterns that exist as it relates to humans and their life cycle. In fact, when he talked about teenagers, where are the parents of teenagers? Moms and dads, here's what he said about teenagers. Storm and stress. This is what the words he used to describe parenting a teenager. They are storm and stress, emotionally volatile, moody, unpredictable, selfish, rebellious. And this gentleman just gave me a amen, right? Now, here's what's interesting. He took it another step. He called children pre-humans. He called adults civilized men. He called teenagers savages. Now, what's interesting is this was 1904. 20 years later, every behavioral scientist in the world had debunked his theory. And isn't it interesting that as I was reading storm and stress, moody, volatile, rebellious, selfish, there were parents in this room that were just nodding your head. For the last 114 years, we've basically said, this is who a kid and this is who a teenager is supposed to be. And here's a heads up, parents. Children are incredibly adept at living up to our expectation. But they don't have to be that way. Teenager kids, listen, you don't have to be selfish. You don't have to be moody. You don't have to be rebellious. You don't have to be emotionally volatile. We just expect you to be that way. And what if, as a family, what if, as a church, you decided this is us and we won't underestimate you here? Because you can love God with all your heart and you can love your neighbor as yourself. What if we started acting like what a person does can actually impact and affect what a person believes? What they do can actually affect what they believe, to which every astute theologian in the room goes, whoa, 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 time out, time out, time out. Now you're endorsing a works-based theology. No, I'm not. I'm simply asking those of us in this room to consider what James, the brother of Jesus, said. James, the brother of Jesus, who didn't believe his brother was the Son of God when his brother was alive. Because what would it take for you to be convinced your brother was the Son of God? But James' story changed. Why? Because his brother was crucified on Friday, and a couple of days later, he had beach with him, or he had breakfast with him on the beach. James said, don't just listen to God's word, do what it says. If you don't, you're just fooling yourself. See, I think our kids will understand more, the next generation will understand more about God when they do what God created them to do. And what God created them to do is to love him with all their heart and to love their neighbor as himself. And I could tell, you guys have got that deer in the headlights thing. You're having a hard time following with me because this is it's theoretical and it's spiritual, and I just don't get it. Let me change the frame of reference to maybe help you understand what I'm talking about. Let's just say, instead of me compelling moms and dads in this room to help your children begin to serve others and love their neighbor as yourself, I'm trying to help you become really passionate about mountain climbing. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get you to be a passionate mountain climber. And so my first thought is I'm going to show you some movies about mountain climbing. So I show you the movie Cliffhanger, where apparently Sylvester Stallone thought it would be cool to wear shorts while you're climbing a mountain. And then the movie Vertical Limit, which may be the worst movie ever in the history of movies. And so you watch these movies and you're like, I don't know if that really helped me at all. And then I say, okay, let's watch the movie Everest, which will scare you from even getting close to an anthill, okay? Because the movie Everest is intense, but it shows you how to climb a mountain. And then there's somebody in this room, usually, guy or girl, there's usually somebody in the room is like, hey, I read the book that the movie Everest is based on, and it was so much better than the movie. You ever know those people? They're like, hey, the book was so much better. The movie is okay, but the book was so much better. You know who I'm talking about? I think they're called annoying. Those people. So you decide, I'm going to read Into Thin Air, which is the backstory of the movie Everest, and I'm going to buy you a checklist from REI of all the things that you need to learn how to be a passionate mountain climber. Now watch, ladies and gentlemen, if I show you 3 movies about mountain climbing, I give you a book to read about mountain climbing, and here's a checklist about mountain climbing, does that make you a passionate mountain climber? Can I tell you why I have friends who are passionate mountain climbers? They climbed a mountain. And here we sit as moms and dads, and they go, and we do this. I'm just not sure why my kids don't love God and don't love serving other people. Well, maybe it's because they aren't seeing you do it. Maybe that's the tension. Maybe the tension for us is they haven't seen us. So I would submit that service is discipleship. You want to disciple your kids? Model service. Encourage them to serve. Take them somewhere where they put somebody else ahead of themselves. Service is discipleship. And can I tell you why we don't like this definition of discipleship? Psst. This is going to sting. It is so much easier for us as parents to tell our kids what they should believe than it is to coach them how to serve. It is so much easier for me as a parent to go, this is what you should know and this is what you should do, rather than for me to actually serve and let my kids see it. The other is easy. It's lazy. Serving requires buy-in. And the reason why we don't buy in, secondly, is that for most of us in this room, it's not a priority in our own life. Let me give you a heads up. It's the reason why I'm going to pick on the men, because I is one. It's the reason why, sir, on Saturday afternoons during the fall, during college football season at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you've got your feet kicked up on the coffee table, and your wife, for the first time all day on a Saturday, is in the shower. She's been slaving, helping, serving, raising children. And so while you're watching television, watching football, she's in the shower for the first time. And you hear all this joyous noise because it's her solitary place. And she's singing and there's music. And you're watching the football game and all of a sudden you hear screaming. She absolutely loses her mind and comes down the stairs with a towel wrapped around her, dripping wet. And you're like, well, hello. And you're like, no, that's not going to happen. She's like, where are you? And you're like, what? Well, what is your 5 or 6 year old child bypassed you sitting on the couch watching football, went up the stairs, and while she's in the shower having the first shower of the day, the kid's knocking on the shower door, and she thinks something's wrong, and she's like, what's the matter? And your child's like, will you open my fruit snack, please? And her first question is, where's dad? You know why your child went to mom and not dad? Because child knows mom will serve. So you can't tell me that they can't catch it. Some of you have had that experience or experiment done on you. And here's what's incredible. If you're visiting, I got incredible news. Number 1, Rob will be back next week. Number 2, you don't have to do one single thing that I'm talking about, and Jesus is still going to love you. Isn't that amazing? There's not one single parent that has to do what I'm saying, Do what I'm imploring you to do. Jesus is still going to love you. But can I give you something from experience? When I do something I don't have to do, God does something in me that I never expected. When I do something that I don't have to do, God does something in me that I never expected. Perhaps the lid in your life spiritually, mom and dad, is that you just do what you're supposed to do instead of what you don't have to do. And if I could take it a step further, and this is going to sting, for a lot of us in this room, maybe the life you've chosen requires so little of God because your life requires so little of you. If I may, for a lot of us in this room, your life is boring. And let me tell you why. Because you've made it about yourself. You've reduced your life to you, Dad, to you, Mom. So what have you done lately that you didn't have to do? What have you done lately that you didn't have to do? Our son graduated last May, played football at Duke University, graduated last May cum laude from Duke, a prestigious school, and promptly 2 months later moved to South America. He joined the Peace Corps. And I thought, what an absolutely waste of an education. Until I realized he has a mom who's modeled what it's like to serve. He's a lot more like Jesus than his dad. So when's the last time you did something you don't have to do? Because whether you like it or not, this is us. Jesus, I pray today, this afternoon, that you'll help somebody take one step closer to this idea of loving God, loving their neighbor. I pray for the mom and dad who are at their wits' end because they are parenting Generation Z, an insanely tumultuous time in our culture. And we ask, what should we do? What should our priority be? And perhaps, Spirit of God, what you say to us today is we've overcomplicated it. It's love God and love people. It's us modeling that. So I pray for the mom who is at her wits' end, the dad who's frustrated. And I pray for the teenager and the child that's here. For that young man, young lady, regardless of how old they are, that they would model for their parents what it's like to serve somebody else. And in the process of our serving, we become like you, because ultimately, we are following someone who laid his life down for other people. Help us to become more like that, to serve as a way to be discipled.